Let's be honest. When someone ignores you, it burns. It digs deep, right under your skin. You feel dismissed. You feel invisible. Like your presence, your worth didn't even register on their radar. And the first instinct, to shrink. To question yourself. To wonder, what did I do wrong? But let me say this clearly, being ignored is not a reflection of your value. It's a revelation of theirs. You're not overlooked because you lack power. You're overlooked because you have it. People don't ignore what they don't notice. They ignore what they can't control. You weren't made to chase attention, and your worth was never meant to be validated by shallow approval. When you are ignored, it's not always rejection. Sometimes it's redirection. That silence, it's a signal, a wake-up call, a test of whether you're going to beg for crumbs or build your own table. Will you beg for acknowledgement from those who can't even acknowledge their own flaws? Or will you rise, reclaim your space, and stop handing out access to people who haven't earned it? We live in a world where everyone is loud, but few are present. Don't let the noise of neglect drown out the truth of who you are. Don't misinterpret being ignored as being less. Sometimes people ignore what threatens them, what challenges them, what shines too brightly in a room built for dim lights. You were never too much. You were simply too real for someone who wasn't ready. The pain of being ignored. Use it. Let it fuel your strength. Let it carve a fire in your chest that drives you harder, makes you bolder, and sharpens your focus. You don't need validation to be valuable. You don't need applause to be powerful. You just need clarity about who you are and what you bring. So here's your call to action. Stop waiting for someone to see you. See yourself. Stop seeking spaces that shrink you just to be accepted. Walk out, level up, become so grounded, so purposeful, that the silence of others becomes irrelevant noise compared to the roar of your own growth. Let their silence be the sign that it's time to elevate. When someone ignores you, your first instinct may be to turn inward. You begin to examine your tone, your words, your presence, searching for some invisible offense you must have committed. You spiral into self-blame, thinking maybe if you had done something different, they would have responded. But this entire emotional loop is a trap. The act of being ignored speaks volumes, but not about you. It speaks about them, their discomfort, their insecurities, their need to control, their inability to confront something powerful, something true, something real. Silence is a weapon people use when they don't have the courage to communicate. It's a tactic of avoidance, and that avoidance is often rooted in fear. Fear of confrontation, fear of accountability, or fear of being seen for who they really are. When someone chooses to ignore you, they're not taking the high road. They're avoiding the terrain altogether. And that's not about your value. It's about their capacity. People ignore what they can't control, what they envy, or what makes them feel small. If you've ever been met with silence in a room where you deserved a response, that's not a reflection of your impact. It's a reflection of their inability to meet you at your level. Sometimes your presence is so undeniable that silence becomes their only defense. They can't match your truth, so they act like it doesn't exist. They can't mirror your integrity, so they choose to look away. That's not on you. Being ignored can be a subtle form of manipulation, a passive way of saying, I don't have the tools to handle this, so I'll pretend it doesn't deserve my energy. It's an emotional deflection, a silent tantrum disguised as maturity. People who operate from emotional avoidance will always try to make you feel like you're too much, when in reality, you're just too clear. And clarity intimidates those who are lost in their own confusion. The hard truth is this: when someone ignores you, they're revealing what they lack. They're showing you they don't have the emotional strength to deal with confrontation, the maturity to engage in meaningful dialogue, or the grace to acknowledge your humanity. They're exposing their inability to handle real connection. That silence isn't your burden to carry, it's their truth leaking through the cracks. We often internalize being ignored as a sign that we're unworthy or forgettable. But what if it's the opposite? What if your presence is so loud, so impactful, that ignoring you becomes a form of resistance? People don't ignore what doesn't affect them. They ignore what does. What stirs something. What challenges something. What breaks through their carefully constructed comfort zones. And sometimes, you are that breakthrough they didn't ask for but desperately needed. Ignoring someone is easier than facing the discomfort they bring. And if you bring truth, strength, honesty, or change, you will be ignored by those who aren't ready to receive it. Not everyone can handle the weight of who you are. And instead of admitting that, they pretend you're not there. But their silence screams louder than they realize. It screams, I can't meet you where you are. Stop interpreting their silence as evidence that you don't matter. It's often a loud signal that you matter more than they know how to handle. When people can't recognize your light, it's not because you aren't shining. It's because they've chosen to keep their eyes shut. Their blindness is not your responsibility. Their silence is not your cue to shrink. It's a reflection of their discomfort, not your inadequacy. Understanding this changes everything. It stops you from shrinking in the presence of silence and teaches you to stand taller. Because the next time someone ignores you, instead of asking, "What's wrong with me?" you begin to ask, "What are they running from?" And that shift in perspective hands you your power back, without needing to say a single word. Rejection can cut deep, especially when it arrives silently. It's not just the absence of acceptance that stings. It's the implication that you weren't seen, heard, or valued. But what we often miss in that painful moment is that rejection isn't always about your flaws. It can be about misalignment. It can be a message, quiet, brutal, but necessary, that the space you were trying to enter wasn't built for you. Not because you weren't good enough, but because your growth needed something different, something greater, something not yet in sight. When someone walks away, denies your presence, or chooses to disengage, it feels personal. But sometimes, that rejection is the very nudge your life needed to shift direction. You wouldn't have moved otherwise. You wouldn't have questioned the space you were in, the people you surrounded yourself with, or the value you were placing on their validation. That one act of being pushed away can become the push forward. It doesn't always feel like guidance, but it is. Life isn't always kind when it redirects you. Sometimes, it uses the sting to wake you up. Redirection rarely looks like opportunity when you're in the thick of it. It often shows up as disappointment, silence, or abandonment. But what if that silence was space being cleared for something else? What if the very thing you're mourning right now was never meant to carry your purpose forward? What if you needed to be denied, so you could go and discover what was truly meant for you? Sometimes we cling to places that feel familiar, not realizing that familiarity isn't the same as fulfillment. Rejection breaks that illusion. The danger lies in believing that every rejection is a reflection of your inadequacy. It's not. Some people reject what they don't understand. Some spaces reject what they can't contain. And some doors stay shut because they're meant to force you to build your own. You don't realize your own resilience, your own drive, until you're told no. That no becomes the space where you grow, where you learn to pivot, where you unlock strength you didn't know you had. Pain often carves the path that purpose later walks on. What's difficult is trusting the process while you're bleeding, while you're sitting in confusion, wondering why you weren't chosen, why you weren't heard, why you didn't matter enough for someone to stay. But in that ache, something powerful begins to unfold. You start to rebuild, not just your plans but your standards. You raise your expectations. You get honest about what you truly want, and you stop settling for what merely accepted you. You begin to aim for what challenges, stretches, and expands you. Every redirection carries within it a hidden compass. You just don't see it right away. You won't always get a map. Most of the time you'll be walking blind, relying on instincts you're still learning to trust. But over time, the patterns emerge. You start to recognize that the doors that closed on you were often doors you were never meant to enter in the first place. They led to rooms too small, roles too limited, or people too afraid. And though you may not have walked out by choice, you were still moved. Because you were meant for more. We underestimate how much rejection can teach us. It shows us who we are when we don't get what we want. It forces us to meet ourselves outside of applause and praise. And in that quiet space, we confront what really matters: our resilience, our character, our drive to keep going. That's when purpose becomes real. Not when everything goes your way, but when everything falls apart and you rise anyway. Redirection is not just a shift in plans. It's a shift in self-awareness. It's a moment of transformation disguised as failure. You begin to understand that being turned away isn't the same as being diminished. You're not smaller because someone didn't choose you. You're not weaker because a space didn't make room for you. If anything, you're more dangerous. Because now, you've tasted disappointment and kept moving. Rejection sharpens. It humbles. But most of all, it liberates. It frees you from needing acceptance in places that were never designed to honor your worth. Every no that felt like an end was actually a reroute. You just didn't know it yet. And in time, you'll look back and realize that what felt like abandonment was protection. What felt like loss was guidance. And what felt like rejection was the very thing that set you on a path towards something better, something bolder, something that wouldn't have existed without that redirection. There's a silent habit too many people carry: begging for access. Begging to be noticed, to be heard, to be seen. Waiting for someone else to grant permission for their presence, their voice, their worth. They shrink themselves in hopes that if they become palatable enough, agreeable enough, quiet enough, they might finally be let in. But this mindset is dangerous. Because the moment you beg to belong, you hand over your power. You make your identity dependent on external validation, and that is a currency too unstable to build anything lasting. You do not need to shrink to be accepted. You do not need to water yourself down so others can swallow your presence more easily. And you certainly don't need to chase approval from people who thrive on keeping you in a place of doubt. That kind of dynamic is not connection, it's control. And the sooner you recognize it, the sooner you can reclaim what's rightfully yours. Real power begins the moment you stop asking for permission to exist at full volume. Owning your power isn't about arrogance. It's about clarity. It's about knowing who you are and walking into every room without needing to be validated to feel real. When you own your power, you stop measuring your value based on who responds to you. You start measuring it based on what you stand for, how you show up, and what you're willing to walk away from. You become untouchable. Not because you don't feel pain, but because you no longer let rejection dictate your direction. People who recognize their own worth stop performing for scraps. They stop proving themselves to people who are committed to misunderstanding them. They stop tolerating dynamics where they're always the ones reaching, trying, apologizing, adjusting. When you own your power, you raise your standards, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. And in doing so, you change the way the world interacts with you. You no longer entertain spaces where your presence is seen as optional. There will always be people who treat your presence like a favor they're granting you. The truth is, those people are often threatened by your confidence, your clarity, your refusal to shrink. So they create hoops, power games, unspoken hierarchies. They want you to prove yourself endlessly, just to keep you small. And the longer you participate in that game, the more disconnected you become from your own strength. Owning your power means stepping out of that game entirely. Stop auditioning for roles in other people's lives that require you to mute your spirit. If you have to silence your voice, dull your vision, or compromise your standards to be accepted, that access is not worth having. Power is not about forcing your way in. It's about realizing you were never meant to be there in the first place if it costs you your peace. You don't elevate by being agreeable. You elevate by being authentic, and that kind of truth doesn't need approval. It commands respect. There's a difference between humility and self-erasure. Being humble doesn't mean hiding your light. It means standing in your truth without arrogance, knowing you don't need to prove anything to anyone to be enough. But self-erasure. That's when you start trading pieces of yourself for temporary inclusion. That's when you start giving power away to people who haven't earned the right to influence your path. And that is a betrayal of your own potential. You weren't created to ask for permission to be powerful. You weren't built to knock on doors that only open when you diminish yourself. That kind of access is manipulation in disguise. The moment you decide to stop seeking entry and start building your own foundation is the moment you become a force. People will notice. They'll feel the shift. Not because you got louder, but because you got solid. You became rooted, unshakable. And that kind of presence doesn't go unnoticed. Owning your power also means walking away without explanation. You don't owe anyone a performance of pain. You don't owe them a speech about why you're done chasing their approval. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is be unavailable. Mentally, emotionally, spiritually, for spaces that don't honor your value. You don't need to burn bridges when you build better roads. And the right people, the ones meant for your journey, they won't require you to beg. They'll meet you with respect. You'll realize one day that every time you begged to be seen, every time you tried to force your way into a space that made you feel small, you were delaying your own rise. Power doesn't ask for approval. It exists with or without applause. And when you finally choose to own yours, you stop knocking, you start walking. Pain is a powerful teacher. It doesn't ask for permission. It enters unannounced, breaks comfort zones, and demands attention. Most people run from it, suppress it, or try to distract themselves with noise and business. But pain, when faced head-on, has the ability to forge something unshakable inside you. It doesn't just hurt, it sculpts. It refines. It strips away illusions and leaves you face to face with the truth of who you are, what you're made of, and what still needs to be confronted. There are moments in life when the emotional weight becomes unbearable. You wonder how you'll get through, how you'll keep going, how you'll survive when everything around you feels like it's falling apart. That pain doesn't just sting, it lingers. It echoes in silence, in solitude, in stillness. And while the world expects you to move on, to get over it, to smile and pretend like it didn't matter, you're left with a wound that demands to be honored. That's not weakness. That's evidence of depth. And the deeper the cut, the greater the strength that can be built from it. Strength isn't built in comfort. It's not developed through ease. It's in the nights you cry alone but still wake up with fire in your eyes. It's in the moments you feel broken, but choose to take one more step forward. Pain stretches you beyond the limits you thought you had. It introduces you to the version of yourself that doesn't need applause, doesn't need approval, and doesn't need the validation of those who left. That version of you is forged in fire, and fire doesn't ask if it's being too harsh. It just transforms whatever it touches. Pain clears the room. It reveals who truly supports you and who only stayed when it was easy. It makes you see clearly, no masks, no filters, no illusions. In pain, there is clarity. And that clarity may hurt even more at first, but it's necessary. Because once you see the truth, you can never go back to pretending. That discomfort becomes a boundary. It becomes armor. Not the kind that hides your heart, but the kind that protects your soul. It teaches you to stop reaching for what hurts you and start standing firm in what heals you. Too many people avoid pain, and in doing so, they delay their own evolution. They numb, they distract, they deflect. But unprocessed pain doesn't go away. It just hides, festers, and eventually takes control in ways you can't see. But when you choose to face it, when you choose to feel it fully, you take back the reins. You become the one who decides how it shapes you. You choose growth over bitterness. You choose healing over hiding. And that decision, again and again, builds resilience that can't be faked or bought. It's not about pretending pain doesn't hurt. It's about allowing it to guide you toward transformation. You let it teach you what mattered too much, who you gave too much power to, and what boundaries you need to build. It helps you separate what is essential from what is toxic. Pain makes everything sharp, focused. It reveals what you value and what you need to let go of. And through that process you start to rise. Not because you avoided the storm, but because you walked through it and came out forged by it. There is strength in vulnerability. There is strength in saying, yes, I hurt. Yes, I feel deeply. But I will not be defined by this pain. I will be refined by it. That shift in mindset is everything. It transforms you from victim to warrior, from broken to bold. It doesn't erase what happened. It empowers you to respond with wisdom. Pain has a way of turning wounds into wisdom, scars into standards, and heartbreak into hunger. The hunger to grow, to heal, to rise. You start to look at the people who hurt you differently. Not from a place of vengeance, but from a place of wisdom. You stop trying to prove anything to them. You stop waiting for closure or an apology. You realize the pain they caused was the catalyst for your next level. And with that realization, the pain loses its grip. It no longer owns you. It becomes fuel, not a chain. You learn to turn the sharpness inward. Not to harm yourself, but to cut away what no longer serves you. When pain becomes a tool instead of a trap, everything changes. You begin to carry yourself differently. Not with bitterness, but with strength. Not with coldness, but with clarity. You've survived what others tried to use to destroy you. You've walked through emotional fire and didn't burn. You transformed. That transformation is not loud. It's not always visible. But it's permanent. It shows in the way you speak, the way you move, the way you choose peace over drama, and purpose over distraction. This is what strength built through pain looks like. It's not showy, it's solid. It doesn't chase attention, it commands respect. Because real strength isn't about appearing untouchable. It's about being deeply touched by life and still choosing to stand, still choosing to rise, still choosing to move forward, no matter what tried to hold you back.